Hello and welcome to EPR with your favorite environmental enthusiasts, Nic and Laura. On today's episode, we give our shout-outs. Laura and I discuss the process of learning new things. We interview Heather Miller, the Vice President of Business Development and Principal Historian at HRA, about cultural resources, music, and the Green Bay Packers. And finally, on this day in science, Charles Darwin began drafting The Origin of Species. So I guess he wrote down when he started it. He knew this would be a big deal, maybe. And he was like, okay, this is for history. I'm going to write down when I start writing this book.
Well, maybe he was a journaler and he was like, I have this idea.
Right. Yeah. So today I wrote my first words. Cool. We'll go with it. Anyway, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. Hit that music.
All right, our shout out for today goes to Ian Smith at HRA. Congratulations for winning the National Council on Public History's Excellence in Consulting Award for his expert witness work on behalf of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes and the Coeur d'Alene tribe.
Made it.
I love those names. They're so fun.
Yeah, that's why I write them.
Be sure to share your promotions, new jobs, professional and project awards with us on EPR website so we can give you a shout out here. And don't forget the NAP conference starts next week, May 17th through 20th. And can't believe it's finally almost here.
I know, right? Jeez. Ugh. It's been a long time coming. It's going to be really fun. I'm really excited for it.
Yeah, I can't wait. Don't forget to register at naep.org. We also want to thank our second long-term sponsor, DAWSON, who Nic is a little familiar with.
I might be, yeah.
DAWSON is a Native Hawaiian global business enterprise serving federal clients through construction, PTS, and environmental services. Operating worldwide, DAWSON is headquartered in Honolulu, Hawaii, with offices across the U.S. rooted in Hawaiian values of aloha, embodying humility, respect, and compassion for all, and ohana, family. And DAWSON carries forward a kuleana, which means responsibility, to benefit the Native Hawaiian community. DAWSON's environmental branch brings science, solutions, and sustainability to planning, compliance, munitions, and remediation. With a permanent 8A status, DAWSON is the perfect solution to all your business needs. You can visit them at dawsonohana.com. If you would like to sponsor a future episode and give me some hard words to read, head on over to environmentalprofessionalsradio.com and check out the sponsor form for details. Ooh, all right, let's get to our segment.
I wanted to talk to you about this before. I saw that you on LinkedIn, you were like, hey, my book is out. I'm sorry, what? You have a book?
I actually have 3 books published. One I have a proof in hand, but I need to redo the cover.
That's wild. That's awesome. So you're an established author, Laura Thorne, not just like, I did one book one time. That's crazy. Like, what are the books? What are they about? Like, what are you?
Well, the first one was actually an iteration of a concept I did previously for my photography. So I like to teach photography, and I don't teach like how to set your camera settings, although I can. And that's kind of like phase 2. But I really feel like, if you're learning guitar, the first thing that you need to do is pick up the guitar and say, I like this. And you start picking out some tunes without knowing anything about how guitar works.
Right,
and then when you decide like, hey, I'm at a certain level, now it's time to actually learn technical skills. It doesn't often happen the other way around where you're like, let's learn the technical, like, here's the chords and, this is what you do and octaves and that stuff. And then you're like, oh, I love this.
That's really fun. Yeah.
Which is why everyone like myself quits piano when we're 12, because they try to teach you the technical stuff first.
Yeah, I know.
Anyway, same concept with the camera. I want people with their smartphones, especially young people, to have their first foray into art and seeing things as a conscientious observer through photography and composition. So understanding depth of field and rule of thirds and framing and all of these things that take a regular snapshot where your subject is always dead center in the middle and there's no depth and you're not paying attention to what's in the background. Like there's like 12 dimensions that I teach.
That's crazy.
Over the year. And I did it as a calendar the first time, and I spent a lot of money, and now I've still got like 100 calendars sitting here because calendars have a very short shelf life.
Yes, they do.
And
Very
they're really
specific shelf
awesome. Yeah, they're really awesome. They're pretty. If you want one and want to cross the dates out, I'm happy to give you one. But
so
the
funny.
next year I was like, all right, I'm going to turn this into a journal. And so I have the journal. But I, like you were just talking about before we started recording this conversation, I am a dreamer, but I'm also a doer. So I have a list of probably 50 to 100 books that I intend to do. And
oh my God, that is what?
and they're underway. So I'm just like doing one after the other. So right now, the latest ones were a business consulting book, coaching for artists on how to make their goals into their actionable tasks. And the other one that just was released was for my career coaching. And it is making your action plan for finding your job.
Wow. That's really impressive. And that's so funny. Like, so again, this is another parallel between you and my wife. Like, she's really good at photography, right? Really good.
Yeah.
Like, to the point, like, we were on a cruise once and she took a photo because she really hates when she gives a camera to someone and they're like, basically show just our eyeballs. They're like, yeah, we got a picture for you. There you go. Makes her crazy. So she's like, I'm going to do it right. If anyone ever asks me to put the camera, I'm going to take a good picture, right? So she took one picture for this couple and they were like, oh my God, this is amazing. And everyone else around heard that. And I'm not joking. 10 in a row. People just kept coming up and she kept taking their pictures and they kept getting blown away. It was really funny. So yeah.
That's awesome.
That's the
I feel like a lot of environmental professionals are photographers. You know, we're out in this usually beautiful habitat and seeing things that other people don't get to see. And it's really aspiring and fun. And I think I just turned aspiring and inspiring into one word.
I was just going to go with it, though. You know,
I know. I'm trying to learn to call myself out, actually hear myself talking, and then correct myself as needed.
Yeah, right. That's funny, though. Like, I wish I was better at it. Like, it's such a great skill. And, you know, even though I think most of what Lauren does is make our cats Instagram models, but she doesn't have Instagram. So it's like this really unfair thing that's just sitting on her phone with all these glorious pictures. But I wish I was better. I wish I was better at it. But it's also,
you can get this journal that will help you better.
Of course. And but I love the way you talk about teaching. It's 100% true. You're talking about like the guitar was a great example. I literally, like, to my right, I have open a list of tabs for a song that I'm learning because I like playing guitar, and I decided this is one of the other things I'm going to do in the pandemic, right? Is actually get good at it instead of just being like, I can sort of mess around. You know, but like the way that I learned was like, okay, I'm going to do the very basic stuff first. And like the easiest songs I know how to play, I'm going to play. And then I'm just going to get songs that I like, harder and harder ones. But like, that's been way more helpful than, like you said, like, okay, well, this is the, minor 7 here, and you're going to, this, and only this scale, these are the notes that work well. And it's cool to know that eventually, but like starting out that way makes it dreadful. Like, I think it's very dull if you can't relate it to something directly. So that's really cool.
Yeah. Did you know that like I'm sure you do, that the guitar industry is like booming since the pandemic?
That doesn't surprise me. Because like I said, like that's what I did. I was like, well, I've got these guitars back here.
Right. My boyfriend plays guitar and he has been refurbishing and reselling like his old amps, like pulling them together and fixing the parts that don't work anymore. And he keeps telling me like, this amp was $100 and now it's worth like $1,000. And this thing is this. It keeps showing me all this stuff. And I won't remember them off the top of my head, but he's been showing me the statistics for like Guitar World and the different places where you buy guitar stuff, and it's just like through the roof, people picking that up. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah. It's funny. Like, so my brother is one of those people that like can literally just look at an instrument and he knows how to play it. It's like disgusting. Like it's really, my dad. It's haunting. Like, I'm not joking. The first time that he played drums, he literally just sat down and he hits the hi-hat. He's like, hits the snare a couple times and then just does a drum beat. And, and it's like, perfect rhythm and everything. And he's like, yeah, this is pretty fun. He's hitting and like one of his friends is like, have you ever played? He's like, so you're a drummer? He's like, no, it's my first time. And it's just, you can't compete with that, So I think that stopped me for the longest time because I was like, I'll never be that good, but that's not the goal for me. And I think it took me a while to realize that. Like, I don't have to be as good as he is at it. I just have to enjoy it. And if I enjoy it, you should do it.
Right, exactly. All right, welcome back to EPR. We're super excited to have Heather Miller here today. She's quite possibly the coolest guest we've had so far. We'll let you be the judge of that. And I'll say that we've just been joking about how she looks like an angel in her studio.
Yeah.
The way the lighting is hitting her hair. So
yeah, totally jealous.
Our super cool angel today is Heather Miller. She's a PhD and Vice President of Business Development and Principal Historian with HRA. Did I get that right?
Yep. Historical Research Associates.
Yeah.
And she's our first cultural resources expert on the show. So excited to hear some good stuff from her. And I think you're also, I know last year you were the cultural resources track chair for the NAP conference. Are you that again this year?
I have been for 7 years, actually, in a row, which is hard to believe that much time has gone by. I'm handing off the baton to my colleague, though, Brian Durkin. I'll still be coming, but he'll be taking on some of the organizational things with Cheryl.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that. And thanks for your participation with NAEP.
It's been wonderful.
So just to start us out, if you could tell us what drew you to culture resources and how your career started.
Sure. I mean, I took kind of like maybe a lot of us, not a very straight path to this profession. I've been a historian all the way through. All of my degrees are in history, and I really guess I sort of saw myself as becoming a historian. But there aren't many jobs for PhD historians. And even when I was finishing, it's not yet 20 years, but close, 2002, I was on the job market, and I just really wasn't feeling thrilled about the potential of maybe having to do sort of an adjunct professorship or sort of moving around from job to job. At the time, I had 2 small children and my husband, and I decided that we were going to go to one of 5 cities. And so a good friend of mine from graduate school had another good friend from graduate school who called and said, hey, we've got this job open at this place called Historical Research Associates. And I said, well, I don't know what a history consultant would do. And they were like, well, why don't you, apply? And long story short, I got hired. I still to this day, almost 16 years later, have no idea why they hired me, but they did. And so, I came in as a historian at HRA, which has a history division that does more environmental litigation support and those kinds of things, historical research and support of writing books, doing administrative histories and things like that. And then pretty soon, my boss at the time left the Seattle office, and we didn't have anybody to run our architectural history program. So I was battlefield promoted to architectural history, and, had to really kind of get my feet under me pretty quickly about what that meant, about how that fit in with environmental regulation like NEPA and the National Historic Preservation Act, and how those 2 things come together. And the rest is sort of history. I mean, I did that for I ran that program for about 10 years and love it. I mean, it's so interesting to me to sort of be on the ground involved in that process. And so now I'm both an architectural historian and a historian. It's been great, but
awesome.
Not exactly a lot of people do go into historic preservation specifically or into a cultural resources management type program. I didn't even know what Section 106 was when I finished my PhD, so I was really in the dark.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's cool, though. I think, so many young people think that there's this direct path. Here's my degree, and this is what I'm going to do with it.
And I think that actually the sort of lesson there is to be open to opportunities, that like allow you to try out new things and really sort of explore what might be out there and how it might fit with what your skill set is. I think that we so often get stuck in this idea that we have to be a subject matter expert only, and I'm not saying that people shouldn't be experts in their subject, but that provides this narrow focus when you can actually take those skills and apply them in other fields. And I think that, historians and archaeologists have very specific sets of skills that they don't often know can, have this kind of conversation with environmental. And a lot of times environmental people don't understand that cultural is part of the environmental field either.
Absolutely. You're also a copy editor. How do you balance doing both of these things?
I started copy editing in graduate school. Actually, I got really, I won't say lucky because a lot of people love to teach, but that was never my favorite thing. So I landed a position as managing editor at the Journal of Women's History in graduate school. And I did that for 4 years. And in that process, learned how to copy edit and sort of deal with publishing, reviewing articles and manuscripts and things like that. So I learned that there. And then I went on and while I was finishing my PhD, I was an acquisitions editor at the Ohio State University Press for another 4 years and honed some of those skills there more. And then people started asking me to copy edit for them. And that I've been doing for about 20 years on the side. And yeah, I think most people in my life wish that I wasn't always sitting at the computer doing this stuff, but right. I love it. Copy editing for me is a completely different brain function. And it's something that it's just a different thing. And it's been a good side gig for a long time. As a single parent, having a second income was really helpful. So it's my retirement plan that I'm going to live in Spain and just copy edit from abroad.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah, that does. That sounds great. And,
and it's nice to interact still with more of an academic kind of crowd. I do journal editing still for the Journal of Feminist Studies and Religion. And it's been interesting. I'm a women's historian by training. And so kind of having still a little bit of my fingers in some academic writing has been good for me. I like it.
Yeah.
That's neat. Women's history historian. I like that.
Yeah, it's kind of wild. Like, you can say you had these layers of interest, and I think sometimes we kind of get lost a little bit on this is my job and this is what I have to be doing all the time. And you should, enjoy what you do. But I love that you're able to take multiple layers of what it means. When you say the term cultural resources, right, it's very broad. And like you mentioned, it ties into environmental policy, but some people don't really know that. So I don't know, maybe let us know a little bit about, talk a little bit more about that and how cultural resources, how broad it is and how it ties into environmental policy too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think NEPA practitioners understand that cultural resource is one of the subsets of the environment that we need to look at. Everything we see around us has been modified by humans, and, humans have a history. And whether you're an archaeologist and you look at, things that weren't necessarily transmitted through the written word, or you're a historian looking at that, the history of the environment is one of constant changes, most of which are made by humans, at least in the environments in which we live. And so, I hate to say that we're the redheaded stepchild of the environmental firm or world, but I did find, I was really surprised. I think I kind of had this idea when I first started doing this, that this was something that everybody knew. And the more I began to interact with, especially large scale projects, big transportation projects or large kinds of things that required a NEPA study or something like that wasn't just straight Section 106. It became pretty clear to me. In fact, the reason I got to NAEP is I was asked to be on a panel about one of these projects. And I realized at that conference that nobody was really talking much about cultural resources at that point. Not that it was completely out, but it just wasn't as prevalent. And that's why I wanted to become the track chair, because I felt like it was really important for the environmental people, like the bugs and bunnies and water and air people, to sort of understand that the cultural part is part and parcel of what we do. And so yeah, that really, I think, struck me. And I wanted people to understand also, even if you take just a purely cynical approach, that a lot of the hangups in these processes come by ignoring something like the tribal nexus. The fact that, you might not understand that what you're looking at today was a burial site or this, maybe even a contaminated, industrial site. Things change over time. And without somebody to tell you what was there original, was there, from our perspective, history and archaeology and ethnography, you really don't get the full story. So I think, that's why I always find it's really important. And once people kind of get that and they're like, oh, right, environment. People hear environment and they think, bugs and bunnies. They don't
always
water and water and soil and air. And that's true. But trying to broaden that understanding and make cultural resources just as important in the process at the outset, because actually the better you front load it and get that conversation going, which is the spirit of NEPA and Section 106 is right to have a conversation, an informed conversation about the environment and potential effects or impacts that a project might have. I think it actually helps to both inform the project as it comes along and, prevent possible problems down the road.
Awesome. It's such important work. But you have so much knowledge. I love history, but my memory is awful. So I never could really do anything with it because I can't remember the people's names, the dates. I just know that stuff happened, and I think it's cool. So I envy.
I can't either. I would like to point that out. And I actually think that a lot of times people, and not to interrupt you, but, I can't tell you how many times I've been on an airplane and somebody says, oh, what do you do? I'm like, oh, I'm a historian. And either their eyes roll back in their head and they're like, too many names and dates, or they say, I watch the History Channel too, which to me means I love war, or I love, sort of like tanks and that's fine too. No offense to the History Channel watchers, because I watch it too. But for me, I think what I then try to explain to people is actually history is a toolkit. History is a process. It's just like a scientific method. And so what historians bring, and also archaeologists, is this ability to sort of, you don't need to know all the dates and names. You need to know how to find that information and how to analyze it within the context of its time, write that in an easily readable manner, and properly document it. And so from my perspective, history is more of a process than a knowledge base.
Darn it, I could have been historian.
Come on, Laura. Yeah.
You still got to pass those tests in school, though,
Yeah.
But speaking of which, so, you mentioned that your background was in history and then you got into cultural resources. And I'm sure you didn't know all this 106 stuff, and you meet people who don't. If I am a younger person and I'm interested in maybe I do love history and the environment, like what advice would you have for them, getting started to help launch their careers?
Yeah, good question. And I get asked it a lot. I think, so the first thing I said before about being open to new opportunities and to always, just say yes to things. Don't say, oh, I don't know that, say, oh, well, it's about curiosity. But if somebody wanted to get into, say, the cultural resources management field specifically, or historic preservation, would be to really get to know the regulations. So read, as boring as these things are, but read the NEPA regulations, read the Section 106 and National Historic Preservation Act, and really get to understand, what goes into that. Because what it comes down to at all times is getting back to that process and following that process. So, like I said, I didn't even know what Section 106 was, and yet that drives the vast majority of the business that we do in cultural resources, and environmental. NEPA, of course, drives most of that. And so really understanding it and looking for opportunities to work on projects where that comes into play. So I think that that's the first place to start. The second place to, would be to talk to people, to practitioners, and really get a sense of, what do they do on a daily basis? Like, I can't tell you how many people say, well, what does a regular day look like for you? And I get a sense of it. Do you really want to do this? Especially on the archaeology side, it's hard because a lot of people who become archaeologists want to be Indiana Jones, or they want to dig up, a Roman site in Italy. And lots of archaeologists do that. But the truth is that archaeologists in the cultural resources fields are mostly digging negative shovel probes. And I've heard from some archaeologists that gets really boring and kind of not fun anymore. Like, you've lost that excitement, I guess. But it's also, you do find things, and you're part of a process that helps protect things. And I think that feels really important. So I would do, that's the kind of thing I would look at is the rules or the regulations, and then talking to people about it. And also recognizing that, you're not going to get rich being a cultural resources manager and be okay with that, but also learn how to advocate for your strengths.
That's a really good point.
On the other side of the coin, the people that do sort of litigation support for environmental history, I think it's really, really, really important to understand manufacturing processes and how various kinds of pollutants get into the environment. So, for instance, PFAS compounds have come up as a concern recently. And you need to understand, where did they come from and who used them and why, and that kind of thing. So
that's an interesting point. Yeah.
And you kind of touched on something I think is really interesting. As you get older and you get more experience, you become, if you become a manager, you're going to be out in the field less and less. And so I don't know, maybe you can talk a little bit about how that shifts over time, and what do you do if you miss being out in the field?
Well, you just described my career trajectory to a certain extent. I, definitely kind of succeeded myself out of doing any real work at a certain point.
Yeah.
And, now, especially as being like a business development manager and proposals manager also, we write a lot of proposals. Now, of course, it's, writing proposals is kind of exciting because it's like the anticipation of this sort of thing. We might win this work, and how would we win this work, and that kind of thing. And I do enjoy that. I do miss, however, always getting to go out in the field. So, when you're in a company like HRA or something like that, I think you just have to advocate for yourself to be able to still do project work and find a good balance, So I think it's just, and there are people who never want to do that. We certainly have people who are technical track who would much rather just be out in the field, directing a field crew. And these are people with lots and decades of experience, highly experienced subject matter experts and practitioners who just don't want to do management and administrative stuff. And I think that that's fine too. And I think some people are really not comfortable in administrative kinds of positions, and they kind of find their way, their path.
That's great. I think that it does become harder, especially when your bosses say, we see you in this role. And you're like, no, I don't see myself in that role.
Yeah. I was basically the only person that anybody thought could actually do marketing in our company, which I don't know if that's good or bad. They're like, oh, you can talk to anybody. Go for it. I don't know that was a compliment necessarily.
Right.
But yeah, especially in a smaller firm, people have to wear multiple hats. And I think that you have to be comfortable with that. And some people just aren't comfortable with that. And that's fine, and they're really, really good at what they do. So they should be doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you have some good field stories? Maybe there's one about Kodiak Island. I heard you might share.
Well, my client at the time probably wouldn't love to hear this story, but we were doing a lot of work on Kodiak Island for the Coast Guard base up there. And what an opportunity. I mean, it's just a glorious place to be, especially like August. I mean, you don't necessarily want to be there in December, but we were out with our client who's an archaeologist working for the Coast Guard. And he was ex-military. And, you carry bear spray when you're on Kodiak. Like you have to carry it. Like, although honestly, I have never seen a bear at Kodiak. Like I've been there probably 8 times.
Wow.
And everyone I know has been like, oh, there's a bear down at like Buskin Creek, and we landed once and they're like, yeah, there was a bear sighting just down the road. And we like sped down there. No bears. So I have to say that I'm the only person.
Are these grizzlies or brown or black bears?
They're Kodiak bears.
Kodiak bears. That's right. They're their own bear, aren't they? Okay.
Yeah, but I think they're like a grizzly or a brown bear.
Yeah, they are.
And so we were out pretty far out, in some, whatever you want to call it, Kodiak bush. And we were standing around getting ready to do some field survey. And my colleague who was ex-Marines had this big knife with him. Mm-hmm. And the bear spray has a little tie on it to keep it so it doesn't deploy, accidentally. And he said, oh, I'll get that for you. And he opens up his knife. And I had this thought like, oh God, I hope he doesn't cut himself. Mm-hmm. And he all of a sudden almost cut his thumb off in the middle
of, oh my gosh.
I mean, it was pretty awful. And we laugh about it now, but he ended up getting multiple stitches and they had to, thank God we're with the Coast Guard, right? They got him got him to the hospital, but that was pretty kind of scary event for sure. Not a funny field story, but, just sort of like a safety story. Be careful with that.
But some of those on the show.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's, we don't think that stuff happens, but this is why we have a health and safety officer, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yes, these things do happen. And you know what? When you start talking to people, and this is the benefit of like things like NAP, they happen more often than you think.
Yeah.
Indeed. Sure. But then you have these glorious, I feel like one of the best things about our jobs is the places we get to go and the things we get to see that people just don't always get to see. I've been inside and on top of so many dams. I can't even count them at this point. Flew to Maine one summer and was the photographer for 3 lighthouses that had like archaeological, historic archaeology, old, these were like early 1800s lighthouses.
Wow.
That were on islands that we had to be taken out in a boat to, and kind of they dropped us off and we're like, we'll be back at 5, and these are things people pay money to take trips to do.
Yeah, exactly.
And we were doing this stuff. So I think the opportunities for people who like variety and like to travel and like to feel like they're part of something that's, public facing a little bit more, the opportunities are really endless. I've loved every minute of what I do.
Yeah, which is and just an amazing segue into our next question about Honey Bucket. And
yeah, if you love this, I don't know if you love this.
I did tell this story. Yeah, I did say okay, well, in this one, we were actually driving to a dam, my colleague and I, where we were interviewing a tribe, some tribal folks about these dams had dammed up some anadromous, rivers with anadromous fish, salmon and fish that moved up like that. And so we were doing some oral histories for a coffee table book about the dam project, but also the relationship of that site to the tribe. So we were driving, my colleague and I, who's a good friend of mine. He's actually worked at HRA longer than I have, was on my hiring committee. And I was driving, he's riding, and all of a sudden we started to smell something funny. I started to smell something funny. And I'm like looking at Paul like, you might want to open the window, kind of thing. And he's looking at me like, and we're both looking at each other like, what is this? And then all of a sudden, like simultaneously, we look up and there is a Honey Bucket truck in front of us, like a pumper truck. And it's clearly, off-gassing, as it were. And we laughed so hard. I mean, it was one of those moments where, because we travel together a lot. Sometimes we'll have 5 or 6 people on a trip together to an archive or on a field project or something. And you really get to know your colleagues really well. And we still laugh about that to this day. I mean, it's just like the Honey Bucket truck is classic HRA lore.
Oh, that's great. I love the idea of you both going, was it
exactly
you? I mean,
you don't really want to say something, but you're
right, but you have to at some point. Yeah, right.
But then when you roll down the windows and it gets worse, and you're like, oh,
yeah, this has to be something else. That's so
weird.
But, Laura and I both love music too. And it's actually one of the first things that you and I bonded over was talking about music. And you are a total badass. I think we can say that right away. But you play guitar in bands and it's just really cool. And so where does that love of music come from?
Well, I'll date myself here, but I started playing in heavy metal bands when I was 14 in the 80s.
Awesome.
I just grew up. My parents both loved music. My mom's a pianist. My grandfather was a violinist. He comes from a very musical family, and my dad's family as well. And I started playing viola as a kid and then moved to piano a little bit. And then my mom wouldn't let me play drums in middle school. And I was really angry because I think I had a crush on some guy in like my orchestra class that played the drums. And I'm like, I want to play the drums, And of course I was starting to listen to heavy metal music at the time. And then she was like, you can't play drums. And I said, well, fine, then I'm going to play guitar. So, and I did. I watched Prince Purple Rain, which came out when I was 14. And I was like, hey, girls can play guitar because I hate to say it, but there aren't many female guitar players. And I was just said, well, if Wendy can do it, so can I. And, and I started playing. I've been playing ever since. I took a break during graduate school, but got back to being in bands and have been playing ever since, just casually. I've been in a couple of cover bands that have played out a fair amount, and with COVID, that's all ended.
I know. It's tough.
Yeah, but it's been fun. And my partner plays guitar. And so we have a lot of them, but we haven't played that much lately. But the goal is to, get the band back together.
That's awesome. Nick's got guitars in his house. My boyfriend plays guitar. He still plays metal.
No, I love this. You said violinist, pianist, heavy metal. That is a great transition. And
it's been fun. I've just met such wonderful people in the music community, and it's been a wonderful thing. Plus, it's a good outlet. It's completely different from writing and editing and things like that. So
yeah.
Oh yeah.
I was in orchestra and played cello. I still try to play.
Nice.
So
Do you?
we'll make an NAEP band.
There you go.
Right.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Absolutely.
I'm sure we've got one somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember playing in the orchestra, and I don't remember getting particularly nervous. Do you get nervous playing shows?
I used to when I was younger. And I think it was also because I was always the only girl. And there was this 80s guy guitar player thing going on that was like, they would all stand there and watch, like, what arpeggios are you playing? And like, Ingve doesn't do that kind of thing. And so I always felt really intimidated and judged, I think, as a woman. And I mean, it made me work harder to play harder things, but I was always very nervous. So when I came back to it as an older adult, I just said, F it. I know this is
right.
And I just decided to enjoy it. And I let myself off the hook. So, I just play rhythm guitar. Sometimes I'll play a couple leads and I sing, mostly backup and harmonies and things like that. But I just was like, you know what? I'm just doing this for fun. And I don't really care what anybody thinks anymore. And I think that comes with age.
It's refreshing.
And I decided my desire to play was bigger than my fear. Same with public speaking. I think a lot of people are really nervous about public speaking. And I just kind of decided as a younger academic that this was something I was going to have to do for a career and I needed to get over it. And I think that helped with stage fright as well.
Yeah. So it's a great point. And I think, the younger you are, like, it's a generalization, but you just are so wrapped up in what other people are thinking. And
so true.
And most of the time, those people are also wrapped up in what they think other people are thinking about. So they're not thinking about you at all. They're worried about their own thing. And it's just, it took me a very long time to realize that. That's the one thing I wish I could go back and tell my younger self, like, hey, just knock it off. Don't worry about it. You're thinking too hard, So that's great advice.
Nic, this is like self-help for everybody. I mean, it's so true, And I try to tell my kids that too. Just nobody cares about you as much as you think. So don't worry about it.
They really don't.
Yeah. And as long as you're being a good person and doing things, I think obviously you don't want to take that too far, but and if you love it, why would you be afraid to do it? So
exactly.
I think, it's good lesson.
Life lessons at EPR.
That's right.
I just love that there's so many different things that you do. And I'm actually also super pumped to talk at least a little sports on this show. I don't know. Laura is a sports ball person, which means, she doesn't watch sports. And so I don't want to speak for her, but it's very, I'm a big,
I don't want to speak for her, but I'm going to.
But I'm going to. But I'm going to tell her how she feels about things. No. But so it's funny. We just haven't talked sports on the show much, but you're researching a book on the Green Bay Packers. And before you get going, like, they have haunted me 2 times, right? In my sports life. Once is for not beating Tom Brady like a month ago. So I'm a little upset about that.
Yes. Yes.
But they also did beat the Steelers in the Super Bowl. And so I'm a little sad about that. So I just want you to know that's where I'm coming from here. But what got
Steelers fan, huh?
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. It's born into it.
That's okay. We'll forgive you.
I love that. She's like, it's okay. It's not. But but like, so how did you get into writing a book about the team? Like, what's the backstory there?
Well, and I should say that our trivia team name is Tom Brady's Balls. So that's that'll tell you how I feel about your first thing. Yeah. But so actually, when I said my grandfather was a violinist, his family came over from Bohemia to Green Bay in the 1870s, and they started. Well, the grandfather, the great grandfather to me did horse tack and that kind of thing. And his 4 sons became really interested in both music and photography. And so they asked their dad, can we start a little photography studio in the store? And the anecdotal story is their dad said, well, horses aren't going anywhere, but this photography thing will be over soon. So sure, fine. You can have a little corner of the store. Well, we know how that went. Yeah. But they got to be known as the photographers in that town. And as story goes, they were the first Kodak dealer, like Kodachrome dealer, and they then became the first photographers of the Green Bay Packers. So they also had their own baseball team called like the Stiller something or another. Their last name was Stiller. And I've always been a Packers fan, but I did not know that much about the Green Bay side of my family. We just didn't really connect with them. My grandmother was kind of hostile toward them for some reason that nobody ever understood. But When I lived in Ohio, I went to Canton to the Football Hall of Fame because I've grown up. My dad played football. Like we were a big football family and boys and Packers fans, right? But like I didn't really get why. And I went to Canton to the Football Hall of Fame and saw that all of these photographs that they have up, historical photographs, have my name on it, have my mom's maiden name on it. And so I realized, hey, wait a second, there's a real history here. And so anyway, my boyfriend took me to a Packers game 2 years ago and my first one ever at Lambeau. And I just got this idea, like how interesting of a story would it be to talk about this sort of, it's an immigrant story, sort of people coming. And there's a lot of Bohemians that live up there. There's all of these towns that have these names. And then getting into photography. And then they also were the first not videography, they took film. There are photographs of my great uncle Otto up on top of the original stadium, actually taking the first moving film of the Packers. And they were the photographers through the 40s and 50s. And they also ran the civic band. So they, one of them was like a band leader and they had a music store / photography store in Green Bay for a long time. And anyway, I just think it's a fascinating story. It's also a story about how pro sports developed. As you know, Nick, the Packers are, a community owned. And I think that's a fascinating story. How that happened and how it's managed to stay that way, which I think is a really special thing. And then also how things like NFL films grew up around sports. So I'm really excited. I came back after that trip to Green Bay, all pumped to start my research. And then COVID happened. So I've been doing a lot of online research and reaching out actually to family members that I never knew to try to tell the story. But yeah, that's my goal. It's my 5-year plan.
That's really great. So you can't be any more interesting. Okay. That's it. No more hobbies for you. That's too cool. Yeah.
My family members would not agree, but thank you. Thank you.
I've been haunted by Green Bay Packers in a different way. But we have so much in common, Heather. My mom's side of the family is from Wisconsin and like St. Louis area, huge cheeseheads. Yeah. And I'm a Green Bay fan by relation. But when my grandparents moved to Florida, they would make us go to every Green Bay Bucks game ever. And I'm like in my early teens having to go to tailgate parties and polka with my grandfather. So this could be a huge reason why I'm not into sports ball.
I get it. That makes sense.
Well, I'm excited about that. That sounds really cool. And
well, let's hope I can get it done. It's one of those things where you try to prioritize your own things, but I'm always doing things for other people. But I really do want to take the opportunity to make this happen. I didn't publish my dissertation, which has always been a little bit of a sore spot for me. And I would love to, I'm a historian. I love to write. I write all the time. It's just never my own things, really, Yeah.
Well, we could talk to you forever.
I know.
This is great. You're super awesome. Do you have any special projects or accomplishments, things coming up you'd like to shout out before we end?
Yeah. A number of my projects are confidential because obviously they're like in litigation and things like that. But right now, really cool work that I'm working on, 2 projects. One is a history of the American Society of Addiction Medicine. So as I mentioned, HRA does what we would call organizational histories or administrative histories of organizations and companies. And this is one that is pretty near and dear to my heart. I've had some addiction issues in my family, and it just so turned out that we ended up getting this project, and it's just been fascinating. A wonderful organization that has just been on the vanguard of thinking about addiction, substance use disorder, as it's known now. So that's one it's fully drafted and in their hands right now, review. So I'm really excited about that, and we are really honored and proud to have worked with that organization. Yeah, so that's on the history side. And then on the CRM side, we are working right now with Southern California Edison on some hydroelectric relicensing projects. So for anybody who works on hydro, the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, licenses these projects, whether they're private or not. And if you have a FERC license, you have to go through a number of studies, environmental studies, water quality, fish, all of those things. But this particular one that I'm working on at Bishop, California, was the first dam went in 1890, and it's proceeded. Most of the facilities out there were built in about the 1910s. And there are 5 powerhouses, and it's a very long system. And so I've had the opportunity to go to Bishop and record all of the hydroelectric facilities, but there are also gold mining facilities out there. There are a number of recreational cabins that are from that era, really kind of cool, just fascinating stories, and really interesting nexus with the tribe, the Bishop Paiute. They had done a lot of ditches and irrigation long before, sort of channeling water out, and are really involved still. So it's been a great project. I actually love hydroelectricity. I like to say I studied prostitutes for my dissertation, actually all the way through. And I like to say I went from madams to high dams. It's kind of my little thing. But, in the West, we have a lot of hydroelectric projects. And so as a result, we've ended up doing a lot of that. So that's been just a wonderful thing to work on. Those are my 2 big projects right now.
Cool. Nic, any other questions before we end?
I mean, do we have to end? Is that a question?
You guys are too nice to me.
We do, because, Heather's got a lot of stuff to go
I know. Yeah, for real. Yeah.
Writing books.
Saving the world one day at a time. And
oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, thank you so much for being on. It was really fun interviewing you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for asking me. I was, I should say terrified, but you guys were very nice to me. So thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. And I can't wait I heard the cat.
Yeah,
the podcast.
I just say bye to you. It's going to miss you too.
Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity. And NAEP is a wonderful organization. I've just met so many wonderful people and had learned so much from you guys. So keep it up.
Same.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's our show. I think I'm going to go maybe try to peck at my cello a little bit, or, just, I don't know, do something to feel a little cooler than I did.
Yeah, right. Yeah, for real. She was great. So much stuff too. That was incredible.
I know. I can't wait to have her on again, or just see her in person to talk about some more stuff. This is really fun, just learning about people and
absolutely.
I
know. It's like
so
it's the
awesome.
coolest part. It's the coolest part of the podcast. It's just getting to know people and what their hobbies are and what they're involved with.
Right. And so be sure to subscribe, rate, and review us before you leave today, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Awesome. See you, everybody.
Bye.